As little as long ago, or as far away as forever, this is where we meet to celebrate what never was as it comes to pass. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Fallen Angels TV, and it's a Saturday Sabbath broadcast. I thank all of you for taking the time to join me this evening. I hope that wherever you are, that it is profoundly beautiful and that spring is coming and that all your flowers are in bloom. And for those of you that are affected by the pollen, I pray that you can breathe and are not overly saturated. Anyways, today I thought I would answer a couple of questions that are related to this as a topic, and also to kind of just tell the story of history, which history, if you look at the two words comprising it, his story, meaning the story of the Most High God, of Christ as the visible embodiment, the Word of God, the angel of the Lord, and that we know that He and the Father are one, and that this would also be relevant for that of the Holy Spirit, which is a part of the knowledge, the wisdom, the outpouring of knowing that comes upon the disciples, the followers, the seekers of truth and wisdom and knowledge and all-knowing. And so, and also the universe. Again, look at the two words comprising the universe, uni and verse, meaning one word or one syllable or one note. And for those that have not read or looked into the Sefer Yetzirah, which is one of those hidden books associated to how the Most High, and specific Christ, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, as the Word, how He sang the universe, the creation, into being, into existence, utilizing, well, this book speaks of the 22 syllables, the characters of the Aleph Bet, the two, basically the symbols of the Hebrew language. And so it's an interesting text. It's very over the top in that its presentation and the information that it references and is related to is very, very far out there, and that one needs to be able to introspect or to imagine in such ways, and with very broad horizon, and to be able to think of possibility in such way in order to understand the book and what it's speaking about, because as I said, it's broad in its attempt, and it's also scientific in its presentation, metaphysical, scientific, and so but anyways, it does explain how, as John talks about, how as the Word of God, the Christ brought all things into being, and how all things had their source, their root in what is the fabric, the source, which is the Creator, and that that the Most High God is all of creation. The universe is everything that is a part of all being, all has its source from the Creator. And if even the what we consider to be nothingness, because even the nothingness is something, even though we consider it not to be, and that we think of it as just being empty space, there is the force from the nothingness is basically the creation and the Creator, and that again all things had their root in this nothingness, because that is the Most High God, and that the light appearing out of the darkness when the Father called forth the Son and said, "Let there be light," that this is the moment that the darkness or the nothingness, because don't want people to think that darkness existed before light, but the nothingness, or what is the force, the source of creation, which again is the Creator, that only the Most High God in His triune aspect, the Father, Mother, and Son, or the Holy Family, the Holy Trinity, that the masculine, feminine, and the child born from the parent, that represents the family, the universal, the creative family and force brought all other things into being, and that the creation is a manifestation of that holy force, and that the light stepping down in vibration, slowing in wavelength, and condensing in form to take on what we see as the material or the manifest world, especially that which we live in, because even the scientists in science knows that what we consider to be even our wooden tables or a rock or anything which we think to be even a diamond of hard substance, that it's basically nothing but atoms, protons, neutrons, and that at its most, in its highest aspect, is nothing more than light, and that all things are light, which again is, the fabric of the force and source of the Most High God. And so today I'm going to talk about that story, and I don't want to be overly esoteric or metaphysical in any way, because I don't want you to not be able to follow along with what I'm going to be talking about. And so I'm going to try to present the story of the creation, the story of the universe, in layman's terms and utilizing verbal definitions which would make it the easiest to grasp, to harness with your mind, and to be able to portray in ways so that you can picture it, hold a vision of it in your imagination, and conceptualize what I'm talking about and how we got to be from that particular point of what the scientists might call the nothingness, and then how the Big Bang, the let there be light moment, and then the expansion of all of creation from that infinitesimal pinpoint of explosive light, because that is the Christ, again, the Most High God expanding into what would be all things. And so science kind of has a grasp on the universe and the story of it, but what they fail to understand is that there is a mastermind, the essence of God and the mind of God, the omnipotence and the wisdom and the all-knowing, pervasive mind, knowledge, the force, the source, that this is God. And from the Creator, the creation came into being. And it's my opinion that those that have utilized the sciences or the accepted knowledge and have guided historically the evolution of man and the knowledge and the teachings, education as the dictate of, supposed leaders or elders, to that of the children and to those that are seeking guidance and direction from those who are supposedly in the know, that has been manipulated by the forces of darkness, specific those powers, principalities, these rulers of darkness of this world, the wickedness in high places, and also substantiated by the seed of Cain and all the followers and those that are born of that line and lineage that are dedicated to keeping us in ignorance, the masses as a whole, and keeping people dumbed down to the truth of what is and what was and how all this came to be and where we are now. And so they have been, and that's why things like Darwinism, even though they are just based on lies, and absolutely those who accept it's just mind-blowing to me the kind of things that people are led to believe. And as long as you mix a majority of truth with a little bit of leaven, you can get people to believe anything and to accept anything. It's like poison. You can put it into food or to something that tastes good, and covering up the toxicity, which is done with the food that is grown, and also the beverages, that this same kind of thing is mass produced from the macro to the microcosm by the forces of darkness. The Lucifer as the eye at the top of the Illuminati pyramid, and all those that are dedicated, that are duty bound to the New World Order. And when I say New World Order, I'm not speaking about just the individuals that gathered together and were organized by Adam Weishaupt after, May 1st of 1776, which that's just the public face of what is the New World Order or the Illuminati, but that to go to the source, because again, they've been working in the shadows for eons, ever since the separation of light and darkness, ever since Lucifer attempted to, said, I will this, I will that, I will exalt myself above the throne of the Most High God, and I will take over the worship of the sun, and I will cause the angels to worship me rather than their true creator. Ever since that moment of iniquity was found within him, and ever since he attempted to usurp the throne of the Son and of the Most High God, and to overthrow the worship of them and the knowledge of them, and those that even joined him, the 1/3 of the angels that joined him in rebellion and insurrection. Ever since that time, he has been attempting to sway and lead astray not only the angels but humanity, which came later, and all the pre-Adamic humans that were here upon the planet, everything and everybody. That has been his goal, mindset, and the focus of his efforts. And so the New World Order finds its basis to that moment of time. And that when the iniquity was found within him, and he decided then to become a creature of darkness and to be a force of duality, ever since that time, there has been this war, the enmity, which would result and hold its origin for the enmity as declared in Genesis 3:15, which would be between the two seed lines, the children of darkness, the children of Cain, and that of the children of light, or the sons of the law. And this is also the first time that we have the formation of this duality, when there was the separation of light, going back to right after the first day, right after the Son as the light was called forth by the Father, when he said, "Let there be light," and Christ lit up all of creation, lit up all of the universe, and made all things visible. That this is the moment when iniquity was found within Lucifer, as being the foremost archangel and the foremost cherub, and being what was then the leader of the sons of God. And so, ever since then, there has been this division, and his tempting, and those that joined him, that gave him legion. He has been utilizing legion since that time to put forth what his great plan. And the great plan would be his attempt to, as it says in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah chapter 14, to overthrow the Son and to steal the worship, to be as God, to be as the Most High. And that has been his whole focus, all of his efforts, even that of the unified force of Legion, has been to accomplish this as goal. And that the New World Order, even though we believe that its focus is to create world government and to establish global rule over all the peoples and nations of the world, really its real goal is the same thing as what Lucifer conceived in his mind when he exclaimed that he wanted to exalt himself above the throne of God, to be God, and to direct all the force and all the worship of all peoples and all nations to that of himself. that's the other underlying goals as laid out in the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, and all the different minute, um, all the think tank, like the report from Iron Mountain, and quiet weapons for, or silent weapons for a quiet war. All these things are, again, the effort to establish himself as God. And as what it says in Daniel, that he will declare himself as God in the temple of God and be worshipped as God. This is his goal and the guiding directive of the New World Order. And so all of those secret societies, all of those banded together organizations and groups of individuals, because it's not just one people, it's not just Jews or the KKK or white supremacists, or it's all, he wears all masks and he utilizes all peoples. And so you can't blame just one particular collective group, but he utilizes guiding the antagonism and the opposition, the controlled opposition of minorities, in order to set and to push forth and to establish his agenda. And he's done this since the beginning, even with pitting the angels of the Most High against each other, the controlled opposition. That is the same kind of thing which has led us to be where we are now. And this is why it says in the parable of the sower and the parable of the wheat and the tares in Matthew chapter 13, that it would be Christ in his return, in his coming back, which would devastate and finally end the efforts and bring to judgment where every knee shall bow and every tongue confess. This is not just humanity, but the angels of the Most High God, the rebel angels, the watchers, we as sons of God as well, that everybody will be brought to judgment. The books of life will be opened, and our own actions, our own behaviors, all the things that we have said and done in this lifetime, and even that of our spiritual incarnation, our spiritual life, all those things will be revealed, and then judgment will ensue. The harvest will take place, and those that are part of and that are included among the righteous and the elect will be gathered for paradise and gathered for what will be an eternal age, a new beginning. What 2 Peter talks about as the destruction, how creation would be destroyed once again, and that there would be a new heaven by fire. There would be a new heaven and a new earth. And that all of that would be done in order for the creation to be reborn anew in preparation for what would be the coming, the reign of Christ upon the earth, and that there would be a new beginning. And how all that plays out, of course, we don't know exactly, and whether there's going to be another round of humanity, another portion or partial duality. I don't know for sure, but we do know that that the elect will be called to judge the angels, and that there will be, at some parts it says what would be a millennial reign, and that, again, that there would be a release and a a judgment to ensue after that 1,000-year reign. And then there are other portions and other texts which speak about an eternal age, and that there will never again be evil, death, and a division of good and evil, and the knowledge of duality. And so whether that is a portion to two different places, or that those who go into paradise would have an eternal age such as that, or whether if there's new life and a new chapter here upon the earth, whether duality would exist again. We don't know how all that will play out and how all that will be, but it will certainly be an interesting time. All right, so again, to continuing with the story of creation and how we passed on. Once, as it says in the book of the Secrets of Enoch, to Enoch, it speaks about how after the division of light, the introduction of Christ as the light, and the separation of the visible worlds from that of the imperishable worlds, and the separation of light and darkness, and what was the step down of vibration of light into what is the material world, then Satan and his forces, those who joined him, the angels of the Most High, were cast out of the upper heavens, and they came to rule over this particular world. And that what we find ourselves incarnated in now as angels trapped up in the flesh, or what the book of Genesis speaks about as the body of Adam being formed from the dust, and the dust, or the spirit of Adam, or the spirit, the breath being merged and married to the body, that we are that source, that force, that connecting link of angelic and spiritual embodiment and incarnation, merged with the flesh. And so we are that dual aspect, that binary type of being now, because we live in a fallen world and we are held in a fallen form until what would be the completion of this second world age and the return of Christ, because he is the key, as it says in Scripture, that he is coming to rectify the fall of Adam and the sin of their being beguiled and their wanting to be as gods themselves, and their fall into matter, coming to rectify that original sin. And that that sin has pertains to us, because really what our spiritual embodiment and the things that we did during and up to our embodiment in the flesh, that's what led us to be incarnated into the flesh. And so we have a basis, a reason, and a cause for being here now. And so when Christ came into the flesh the first time, incarnated into the flesh, and showed and proved to not only the rulers of this world, to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that he is the answer and he is the Most High God, that death has no bearing, no hold upon him. And so that was the reason he came into flesh, and not only to live a sinless life, but also to show to world and to all of history and to every era of it that we have a loving Creator, and that the Creator would take upon himself the exact sentence that he would force us as sons of God to go through in what was the Psalm 82 judgment, that we would die like men. And so all of that is a portion to all of us that have incarnated and that are coming into flesh, now that that sentence has been given to all of us, and that he is the answer, and that he went through it himself. And so we can't say, oh, well, you wouldn't go through what we went through, or you were never allow yourself to be judged in that way, because he did. He took it all upon himself. And he took on all of the suffering, all of the pain. He went through the death. He went through all the animosity of the Pharisees and those that conspired to murder him. And unlike us, he was undeserving. Whereas all of us have sinned, and all of us have committed and been a portion, or have danced with, aligned with evil at some part in our life, until we came to be born again, and we came to know why we are here and what all of this was about, and why Christ had to come into the flesh as God incarnate. What all of this is about, why we are here, who we are, all those things which I write about in my 6th book, Sons of God, Who We Are and Why We're Here. And also in my 7th book, Skyfall, The Angels of Destiny, because I explain all these things very elaborately and very in great detail in those texts, and utilize many references from all of the books of wisdom, the Old and New Testament, the Pseudepigrapha, the Apocrypha, the Nag Hammadi Codices, the Dead Sea Scrolls, everything that you can find. And I tie all of those things together to help you understand the story of who we are, and the story of creation and Creator, and the end from the beginning to end, how all things came from light, where darkness came from, and the origins of evil, the fall of the rebel angels and the Watchers, and the fall of humanity, and how all those things tie together into what is the most profound, most magnificent, most incredible story that could ever be relayed or conceptualized or entertained by mind, conceived by thought. And so really, if somebody, if I had a budget and I was a director for some Hollywood movie, this would be the story that I would try to relate, because it's the most profound. It's the greatest story that has never been told. And that all the things, all the efforts of Hollywood over all of time and space, all the eras of history, every chapter of the book of life, all of that together, it's only in putting it all together that it can even have any equivalent to the story that I'm trying to relay to you, and that I speak about and write about in my books and try to help people to comprehend. All right, so wanted to tell real quick because somebody had asked me specific the destruction of Tiamat and the war between the Lord of Hosts and that of Tiamat, or what we know as Maldek, which is just another name for the planet that had existed where the asteroid belt now is. And how all of that, because this is a very important story that all of the pagan nations memorialize and immortalize in their creation stories. In the Canaanites, the Akkadian people, the Sumerians, all the all these old cultures and civilizations, many of the pagan nations, the antediluvian, the primordial world, they immortalize the story of the destruction of Tiamat, the war between the Lord of Hosts, which, if you understand what I'm talking about, and if you can grasp this particular story, this is also written of in the Genesis story of how the earth became null and void. The gap, what people refer to as the gap theory between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. And that this is a very important tale to be understood, because this is the thing that led to what is the new earth and what was the next chapter of the replication, the possibility of life as it was manifest and as it unfolded and here upon what is now the new earth, or what the Sumerians called Ki, I believe is what they call the new earth. All right, so that which I had just related to you is what John was talking about when he said, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, and all things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men." Because that is the breath of life. That is what gives our body consciousness. That our soul, our spirit, that is our connecting link to the Creator, the force of consciousness within us. That is the Christ within us. "And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." All right. Now what I'm going to be explaining is this portion. And I'm not going to read a lot of scripture because I don't want that to dominate this portion of the tale. It says, "And God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." So this particular war, what the Enuma Elish speaks about as the war between the Lord of Hosts, which the Lord of Hosts in its heavenly celestial embodiment is speaking about Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. And that the story of the Enuma Elish is the story of how it was the early formation and how the early solar system came to hold and take form and hold the shape of what we see currently, because it's not all just order. In fact, what we see as the asteroid belt, and even all of the rings of Saturn and all of the different moons and some of the other planets, that is all the debris field from what was this ancient war. And that ancient war was the cataclysm, the confrontation of these two planets. Initially, when Nibiru, and whether it's a planet that was created, like what the Russians speak about as the moons of Phobos and Deimos, and that some say that the moon, our current moon, that it rings hollow, and that when the different moon landers landed on it, that it rang like a bell, that that it might be hollow, and that it could have been created by Elohim. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. All I can tell you is that the story speaks about how a long time ago, the outer planets, the gravitational field, what the teachings speak of as the net force, the gravity of these particular planets, they diverted the path, the orbital movement of Nibiru, and it was captured, and it came to be a part of this solar system. And that in its capture, it was guided, it was led into proximity with that of what was the old planet Tiamat. And that Tiamat was split asunder, was devastated, was split into two halves by one of the moons, what is called the West Satellite, or the western wind of Nibiru. And that one of these moons had hit it and destroyed it. And that when it was destroyed, this is when the asteroid belt and all the comets and all of the debris from that particular conflict and confrontation, or what the ancient stories call as the war of the Lord of Hosts with the dragon Tiamat, that this was the celestial battle. This was the climactic and most, all the stories, this is the apex of their tale. And that when this occurred, when the Tiamat was destroyed, this is also when it speaks about in the Bible that the earth prior to this time had no rain, and that there was a cloud layer, a canopy of clouds surrounding it, a vapor canopy, and that you could not see the earth, or if you were on the earth, you couldn't see through this dense layer of clouds. You couldn't see the stars. You couldn't see the night sky. And this was also a time when it speaks about there was not yet a man to till the soil, that there was not yet a modern creation of humanity. And so when this particular event happened, the water canopy, because think of Tiamat or a planet being a large planet that was mostly covered by oceans, maybe a few islands poking through what was mostly a water world. and that like what we see in the outer planets even today, that they are all covered, like Jupiter and Saturn and some of these other planets, that they're completely enveloped and encased with all of these different colored winds, and that there's dust storms and things of that nature occurring on them at all times, and that if you were sitting on what was the actual surface or where the core of the planet is, that you couldn't see past this cloud bank. That this is the same kind of thing that we're speaking about. That Tiamat was like that. And that when it was hit with this west wind, or the western moon of Nibiru, that the water canopy was split, and that particular cloud layer disappeared. And that when the earth condensed and reformed itself and recondensed into what is the earth that we see now, it did not have that particular layer, that vapor canopy, and that the moon and all the celestial night, all the sun, all of that was then visible. And so this is what is referenced and talked about. And I cover all this in great detail in my book, The Sons of God, Who We Are and Why We're Here, specific the timeline of creation. I talk about all these different things as well. But it's been a long time since I've done a show on this, and since somebody asked me about this and some of the other things, what was Tiamat, what is Marduk, all that. I thought I would explain it. And this would also help those of you that are new listeners or have been studying a lot of the ancient wisdom texts or the epic creation tales of all of the other cultures. This will help you to grasp and to unify them, all of them, with what is revealed in the gospel. Because this same story is repeated. The destruction of Rahab. Rahab is Tiamat, is Marduk. And so when it says, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. This was a result of the destruction of Tiamat, and that where the moon, the west wind, the western satellite, the moon of Nibiru, hit what was the original planet Tiamat, that is where we now have our Pacific Ocean. And that all of the waters and all of the cloud and vapor canopy, all of that drained into what was that gouge, that huge split, that huge hole that was now upon the earth. And so all of the waters, because remember the Tiamat was mostly a ocean world, was a water world, and that at that time there was maybe just a few islands, a few mountains that jutted up through what was, all of the water covering. And so when the gouge was created, all of the waters and all of the ocean went into and filled what was, and that's when all of the other land masses and the earth and all those things came to be. And the meeting place of all the ocean and the land masses, all of that was established. And when this happened, after this happened, and the earth was, because it also speaks about in the Enuma Elish and the other epic creation tales, how the earth was then shifted to a different orbit, and it flip-flopped positions with Mars, and that before this event, Mars was, in where the earth is now, and that it was a place of habitation, that its atmosphere, it was the jewel of the solar system, and life had already been established, and all the megalithic structures, all the cities, all of that were already created and in place upon Mars. But then after this event, the atmosphere, not all of it, but some of it, of Mars was devastated, and Mars switched places with what is the new Earth. And so after that, Earth became the jewel of the solar system. And after the waters and the land masses and the oceans and the seas and the rivers and all of those things established themselves and apportioned themselves accordingly, that this is what the next part of the story speaks about in Genesis, that the earth taking on a new orbit, and God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said, "Let there be light in the firmament." Now, we always wonder, why is it that speaks about the lights being placed in the firmament of heaven, the stars and all of that? Wouldn't they be already there before the creation of life on the earth, or even before the creation of life? Because we know that the planets are spit out by the stars, and that they spin off, and that they take on different spans and different lengths as far as distance away from the different stars, specifically like our sun, and speaking about this solar system. You would think all of that had already had to have been in place, but yet, according to the Genesis accounting, it says that after what I just read about the earth bringing forth the grasses and the fruits and all the trees and all of that, then God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. And then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. Why would the stars be created after the earth in the heavens, when the earth has dependency on the sun for all of these things? Now, if you understand the story that I'm talking about, once the earth was destroyed and recreated, that eventually, even though there wasn't a dense vapor cloud like it was, that was impenetrable before the destruction of the earth, but that there was still the settling of what was the ocean, and the condensation, the vapor, the dew of the morning, and how the waters of the oceans are evaporated and call forth and then make clouds, and then once they condense and they rain upon the earth, all of that settled out and the sky became visible, and the signs of the celestial night, the skies, all the stars and all the constellations, everything became visible after the settling out of this vaporous canopy, the cloud layer, and all of that. And once it disappeared, and once the earth began to settle in how the dynamics would be, then this is why we find after the third day that the lights in the firmament of the heavens would divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and years, and the counting, of time. All of that became possible after the destruction of that cloud canopy. And once the celestial heavens were able to be seen from those that are on the earth. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, which is the sun. He didn't make these after the creation of the earth. These were already in place, but they became visible. And, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. He didn't make them after he made the earth. They were already there, but we couldn't see them. Or those that were on the earth could not see them. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So all of that I just talked about with, the destruction of Tiamat, the war between the Lord of Hosts and the dragon Tiamat, the recreation of the earth, which the Sumerians call the earth Ki, when it used to be called Tiamat, that all of that, that once the earth settled and had its new orbit, and Mars was now, the fourth planet, and the earth was the third planet, or Ki was the third planet, this is when life began to multiply. And all the land masses had established themselves, the ocean, the rivers, all the things, the sun, began to bathe the earth, the water, the rains, all of that was in place. Everything, all the dynamics of what are the forces of nature settled, and it started to take order, and to nature, instead of being just completely in chaos or out of hand, there was then established order, which led then to what would be the next stage, the multiplicity of life here upon the earth. All right, let me see and read that part too real quick, and then I'm just going to share commentary. I just wanted to show you that this story that I'm talking about is in the timeline. Okay, question. Matthew Smith asked me, did the Watchers come to Mount Hermon after they were on Mars? Yes, it was after, because remember again, Mars was already colonized. Even the Sumerians talk about how the Anunnaki had established way stations on Mars and different parts of the solar system, even here upon the Earth. That the reason why the old Earth was destroyed is because that was a judgment against Lucifer and the angels of darkness and the things that they had done and already established in this solar system. And so the destruction of old Tiamat, the recreation of the new earth, all of that was judgment against them. The destruction even of Mars and the atmosphere and the things that had been established and were taking place there. The Most High God, in one fell swoop, had destroyed all of their efforts and all of the things that they had put together, and to show them, to remind them again of His authority, and that even though they think that they are as gods, that there's no way, they have no power such as He has. All right, Stephen Fetzer asks or says, what we call pre-Earth involves more than most want to know or care to, I would say, understand. And that's absolutely truth. This story, the things that, we don't even know about and don't even really talk about or even consider the prehistory, all the things that had occurred before the creation of Adam and Eve and the fall of modern humanity. Mars has a very rich history. Many of the planets of the solar system, and not even to speak of the other aspects or parts of the universe now, whether they had life or other chapters or were, who knows what even is occurring out there. That's all just another mind blower, so, and yeah, even with the history of Mars, it's so rich and so complex and so just mind-blowing, just the planet Mars, and even what we know, with what we see, the things, like there was a movie done by Stuart Best, and I believe you can find this on YouTube. I would search Project Red Star, where he takes an image, and I don't know where he got the image, but the image, and he talks about how he was able to draw in the lines and detail this particular image to put different filters on it, and it basically shows a world, a modern world, or what we consider a modern world, that was buildings and structures and infrastructure and transit tubes and what kind of transit, who knows, but all kind of complex building infrastructure and things that absolutely confirm and show that there was an era, a history that we do not understand in connection to Mars. And as I talked about Michael Barr's book, I did a couple shows on the history of Mars, or the ancient history of Mars. He shows there's a picture of a huge, what is a devastated city on Mars, in this particular chapter of his book, and he shows the infrastructure there. And there's so many others like that. And that even with the images, even though the NASA rovers and Pathfinder and things of those natures were sent to places where we wouldn't see anything that would give us the idea that Mars had once been inhabited, and that those kind of things that are the public face and the public attempts of NASA, all of that is to keep us in the dark, to keep us dumbed down and ignorant as to the incredible history, the incredible knowledge of what had happened here on not even this planet, but others. And that, like even the story, the Sumerian mythology, the Sumerian teachings, they talk about the establishment of Mars as a way station, and that they had utilized it a long time ago for transport of, and that there were a group of 200 Anunnaki that were building and were there upon Mars and that had colonized it. They even talk about in their teachings how the face on Mars was created, and that it was done in honor of the first death of what was a Nuburian exile, a king named Alalu, who was the first one to breach the asteroid belt and to reach the inner planets, and that he had radioed back to Nibiru of his reaching the Earth, and that he had found gold here, and that then later a group of 50 Anunnaki came, and that they also successfully made it through the asteroid belt, because the asteroid belt had always been a barrier to them for gaining access to the inner planets, but that they needed gold in order to stave off the archaeological or the climactic, the depletion of their ozone, and also the destruction that they incurred on their planet every time they came close to the sun in their orbital proximity. And so that was the whole effort, because we ask, why would these so-called gods or the ancient aliens, the rebel angels, why would they come here to mine gold? I mean, why the focus on that in the mythology, in the Sumerian teaching? And it was because they were trying to preserve their other planet and the efforts that they had established there. And so all of that is a part of the history of our solar system that nobody talks about it. We only focus and speak about even in the modern area, or what I refer to as the Second World Age, the last 6,000 years. We don't even really contemplate, or most don't, the Atlantean Age, Atlantis, Mu, the primordial world prior to the modern fall of Adam and Eve. And so, and it's my opinion that all of this has a part to play in our coming to understand who we are, how we got here, and also because I think that the prior times, what I call the prior times, or what the Egyptians called Zep Tepe, the first times, when the fallen angels ruled upon the earth, and their involvement and their reigning and their rulership on other planets, that of specifically on Nibiru and Mars and other aspects of other worlds, like I believe it was Neil Armstrong that talked about the monolith on one of the moons of Mars. There's also many structures on the moon. Like, even if you look at, there was a video that was released by I believe it was the Japanese Space Agency, that showed the landscape of the moon in great detail, almost in HD, that at the very end of that video, right before they go into the dark side of the moon, There's a base that is plain to see in that video. You can find this on my website at fallenangels.tv. It's part of one of the videos. And in fact, what I'll do, if those of you that are interested in what I'm talking about, I will make it one of the featured videos on the main page after this particular show, after I'm finished with this show. So maybe go there tomorrow and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And then right before it gets to the dark side of the moon, you can basically see a spaceport. There's even 3 triangular ships, aircraft. There's a radar tower. I mean, you can see all the box-like structures of buildings. It's absolutely amazing. And we know from a lot of NASA old images that were released at one time by NASA that there's a lot of structures. Like I forget his name, but the guy that wrote the book Somebody Else is on the Moon and Alien Structures on the Moon, that those particular books, they utilize old NASA images that these individuals had once worked for NASA when they had access to some of these old images that we no longer have access to, and utilizing them, they published their account and shared their stories of how, there's incredible structures, massive land bridges, towers, things of that nature on the moon, entire colonies or established bases on the moon and on Mars. And so, all of those things have, I feel, an important part to play, an important part for those of us to understand what the gospel is truly relating. What, Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23 talks about when it speaks about a time when there's not yet man and all the birds of the heaven fled and all the cities of the wilderness were destroyed. I mean, those kind of things, in my opinion, are important for us to understand. Watcher Ruth says NASA, never a straight answer. And yeah, that's been my understanding of what they are trying to do and how they are trying to keep us dumbed down and in the dark as well. And so, we made it to how Earth became the focus of the rebel angels. And according to Sumerian text, it speaks about how they established Eridu, which means home in the faraway, as their first colony, their first base here on the earth, or the new earth, because again, they had already colonized the old earth, and that it was a place of them working and a place for them to do all the things that they did, and that judgment was brought against them and the earth was destroyed, but that the Most High did all of this in order to not only judge them, but to bring the next chapter of what would be humanity and, life. Okay, Stephen asks, what about the great scar on Mars? What do you think caused it? Well, I think that a lot of the huge pock marks that we see, where it seems that many of the planets were bombarded with like almost a shower of asteroids and comets, that all of that was caused by the destruction of Tiamat. And that, it basically rained down all these huge asteroids and comets onto all of the planets. That the debris, went into all of the different, into all of the different planets, and why it is that it only occurs on one face, usually on one particular side of the planet, and that it's my contention that was the particular side that was facing the devastation when it occurred. Now, as far as the long scar, I'm not exactly sure how that was created or what would manifest that, but it would seem like there would have to be a planetary body that was slowly being pulled into orbit, maybe, or that had a weird shape and that that gashed the surface of Mars, and that as it rotated, it continued such gashing, or that something had to hit it and it slid upon the surface a great distance. Those are the only two things that I can, fathom or kind of picture in my mind for having caused that structural anomaly. What do you think, Stephen? You got an answer, and I'll share it. All right, because they're on a delay when he types in his answer. I'll share that with everybody. But anyways, and so I'll depending, I might do a second part to this. But basically, I caught us all up, and then I've been focused on my other show. I've been talking about the Emerald Tablets of Thoth and sharing the focus of Atlantis and some of the oral traditions, the Hopi prophecies, and that of the testimony of Kreta Mutwa in connections to what we're talking about here. And that basically you could take those stories to fill in what would be the time before the modern creation of humanity, the prior times, or Zep Tepe, and that those two stories share incredible information, in my own personal opinion, as to how all that took place and how all that came about and how we find ourselves where we are now as a people and as a species. Stephen says, a part of the planet hit, Tiamat is my best bet. That's what I think as well. I believe that a lot of that devastation and what we see as the pockmark on the various planets were from that massive cataclysm, and that even the rings, what we see as the rings of Saturn and some of the other planets, that is the fine dust and the smaller size rocks that were from that particular devastation being drawn in on a plane, and that the rings that they are creating are the pull, the strongest pull, and that's why we see them lining up and taking on that particular appearance as far as rings, in my opinion. And so, if anybody has anything else that they would like to ask me a question on, I still am at some point going to do a show on Melchizedek. I'm just in the process of compiling the accounting from the various wisdom texts that I'd like to share. the information. It's because I want to be able to cover all bases and present to you all the different opinions and the different stories as are laid out by the the various renditions of the Apocrypha, Pseudepigrapha, the Old and New Testament, even the New Testament Apocrypha, things of that nature, so that when I do a show, I share it in as full account as I can. And so let me see if there's another account. Okay. The following portion of the next part of the Genesis account, where God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that hath life, fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind. Every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day." All of that were the creatures and even the pre-Adamic humans that the Most High had placed upon the earth. And all of that, creatures after their kind, all of that was here and was in a pristine and natural state when the Anunnaki arrived. Because remember, even though they had lived here and were here when Tiamat was a planet, that when it destroyed and it shifted orbit, that and Mars and Tiamat, or Ki, the new Earth, Ki took up became the third planet in orbit, and Mars became the fourth planet, and then we had the asteroid belt. That even the Sumerians themselves, the Anunnaki in their mythology and their wisdom text, they talk about how for the longest time the asteroid belt was a barrier unto them and prevented them from being able to access the inner planets, but that they had already established colonies and also done, all of the things that they were doing as far as creating way stations and establishing colonies on the outer planets and on the moons of the outer planets. But it wasn't until recently, and when I say recently, I'm speaking about according to their own sources, they arrived here on the earth 10 shars ago, which 10 shars, each shar is representative of 3,600 years, or what is the singular orbit of their planet Nibiru, in one cycle of their planet, in that it takes that amount of time. And so 10 shars would be 10 times 3,600, and that would be the equivalent of 432,000 years. And so they arrived here according to their own accounting and to their own mythology. They established Eridu, the first colony, here on the earth at that time, 432,000 years ago. And so from that time unto just 66,000 years ago, that is what I refer to as the prior times, or Zep Tepe. And why the Sumerian kings list, they show that the old kings, the first kings, ruled for longer period of time than even, and that they were demigods according to them. And this is, if you take all of this information into account, all of that makes sense as well. All right, all. God bless you. I pray that the Most High continue to watch over you and keep you safe, and that you find yourselves blessed, and that you keep seeking truth, no matter how weird or how strange it seems, and that you don't discount anything until you read it and study it for yourself, and that you take a priority to make everything relevant, because really it all is in the grander scheme of who we are while we're here and what all of this is about. Be blessed all. In Yeshua and Yahuwah's name I pray. Amen. As little as long ago, or as far away as forever, this is where we meet to celebrate what never was as it comes to pass. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Fallen Angels TV, and it's a Saturday Sabbath broadcast. I thank all of you for taking the time to join me this evening. I hope that wherever you are, that it is profoundly beautiful, and that spring is coming, and that all your flowers are in bloom. And for those of you that are affected by the pollen, I pray that you can breathe and are not overly saturated. Anyways, today I thought I would answer a couple of questions that are related to this as a topic, and also to kind of just tell the story of history, which history, if you look at the two words comprising it, his story, meaning the story of the Most High God, of Christ as the visible embodiment, the Word of God, the angel of the Lord, and that we know that He and the Father are one, and that this would also be relevant for that of the Holy Spirit, which is a part of introspect, or to imagine in such ways, and with very broad horizon, and to be able to think of possibility in such way in order to understand the book and what it's speaking about, because as I said, it's broad in its attempt, and it's also scientific in its presentation, metaphysical, scientific, and so but anyways, it does explain how, as John talks about, how as the Word of God, the Christ brought all things into being, and how all things had their source, their root in what is the fabric, the source, which is the Creator, and that that the Most High God is all of creation. The universe is everything that is, everything that is a part of all being, all has its source from the Creator. And if even the what we consider to be nothingness, because even the nothingness is something, even though we consider it not to be, and that we think of it as just being the knowledge, the wisdom, the outpouring of knowing that comes upon the disciples, the followers, the seekers of truth and wisdom and knowledge and all-knowing. And so, and also the universe. Again, look at the two words comprising the universe, uni and verse, meaning one word or one syllable or one note. And for those that have not read or looked into the Sefer Yetzirah, which is one of those hidden books associated to how the Most High, and specific Christ, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, as the Word, how he sang the universe, the creation, into being, into existence, utilizing, well, this book speaks of the 22 syllables, the characters of the Aleph Bet, the two, basically the symbols of the Hebrew language. And so it's an interesting text. It's very over the top in that its presentation and the information that it references and is related to is very, very far out there, and that one needs to be able to, and that the light stepping down in vibration, slowing in wavelength, and condensing in form to take on what we see as the material or the manifest world, especially that which we live in, because even the scientists in science knows that what we consider to be even our wooden tables or a rock or anything which we think to be even a diamond of hard substance, that it's basically nothing but atoms, protons, neutrons, and that at its most, in its highest aspect, is nothing more than light, and that all things are light, which again is, the fabric of the force and source of the Most High God. And so today I'm going to talk about that story, and I don't want to be overly esoteric or metaphysical in any way, because I don't, want you to not be able to follow along with what I'm going to be talking about. And so I'm going to try to present the story of the creation, the story of the universe, in layman's terms and utilizing verbal definitions which would make it the easiest to grasp, to harness with your mind empty space. There is the force from the nothingness is basically the creation and the creator, and that again all things had their root in this nothingness, because that is the Most High God, and that the light appearing out of the darkness when the Father called forth the Son and said, "Let there be light," that this is the moment that the darkness or the nothingness, because don't want people to think that darkness existed before light, but the nothingness, or what is the force, the source of creation, which again is the creator, that only the Most High God in his triune aspect, the Father, Mother, and Son, or the Holy Family, the Holy Trinity, that the masculine, feminine, and the child born from the parent, that represents the the family, the universal, the creative family and force brought all other things into being, and that the creation is a manifestation of that holy force.